during university, when I was studying art and technology, I felt like, man, this isn't for me. I don't know what I thought I was doing here. Like, I almost dropped out, honestly. And it was Jerry Brzezowska, who's still the chair of the department, who I went to talk to her, and she was like, why don't you take one class? Take this one class. And she gave me with a specific professor, and she was like, just do that before you drop out. And it reignited my love for what I was doing, because they could see something in the way I worked that I couldn't see. I think as you gain seniority, you can see it too in other people. And when you tell someone that, like, you're helping them discover that themselves.
Welcome to the Rise and Play podcast. I am Sophie Vaux, your host and leadership coach. In the show, my wonderful co-host and I sit down with influential and diverse leaders from the gaming industry to hear about their leadership journey. Not the well-polished stories, but the real stories. The up and down, the breakthrough, and the failures. Or should we rather say learnings? Each episode will transport you into a magical space of vulnerability with our guest. And together, you'll be reminded that no matter how hard it is, you are not alone in this journey, and find the courage to keep going. Come and join the ride. Let's begin. As a former product leader who worked 16 years in the gaming industry, I know how difficult it is to get reliable and usable player insights. The logistics of scheduling, recruiting the right players, collecting and reviewing feedback, it is all time away from game development. But you know how fundamental it is to test assumptions with your core audience and iterate at a lower cost before marketing an unproven game. I am proud to announce Playtest Cloud as our key partner, as I have believed since day one in the quality of their service and their mission to democratize player research. Playtest Cloud can take the hassle out of organizing game research yourself and delivers results within 48 hours, allowing you to implement changes in time for your release. Having been a long-time user of the platform, it is the industry standard used by top AAA and mobile studios, and now they also support indie developers with special pricing. Working for a year on the wrong game is an expensive mistake, and you can de-risk it now by investing in your player research. Check out the show notes for a free trial and learn more about Playtest Cloud.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rise and Play podcast. Today, the most lovely Alicia Fortier will be joining us as our wonderful guest. Alicia is a lead game designer at Spryfox with a love of whimsy. She has 10 years of experience in the industry and is active in mentorship and sharing practical game design approaches and techniques to help as a resource for those starting on their journey. Welcome, Alicia. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's so lovely to chat with you.
It's really nice to have you here today. So I just wanted to start off with a little general intro question just to get to know you a little better. So tell me, how did you end up in the industry and what sparked your interest in game design?
So looking back in hindsight, as a kid, I had so many early signs of game design going on. Like, I would modify all the rules to board games and stuff. But growing up, I actually didn't consider myself a gamer at all because I felt like the games I liked didn't count. You know, my brother would play Halo and all those games, and I was like just tragically bad at them. I liked Little Big Planet. That was my big game. Pokemon Battle Stadium was my game. But I felt like this kind of internalized shame about it. And so I didn't think they counted. It wasn't until actually university. I actually started by studying in art, and I've always been interested in technology. I liked getting into websites and stuff. And then I got into interactive art and interactive installations and stuff like that with like merging technology and physical spaces. And it turns out that that is just like inches away from just being games. And I actually made my first like real game through Pixels, which is a local nonprofit that helps women and marginalized genders make their first games. I knew how to code my own little thing, and I made a little project, and I fell in love with game design. That's where I found out what game design actually was, and like that it's something that actually I would really love to do.
It's so great. I think it's so funny when I hear a lot of people say, oh, I played games, but I never considered myself a gamer. I felt similarly. I was like, oh, I play a lot of games, but I'm bad at them. So I'm not actually like into games. I just like playing them. It's like the same thing. It's the same thing with like being a game designer for a while. I was like, I'm not really a game designer. I just am doing the work for now.
Oh my God. Like, yeah, I had to be a professional game designer for a couple of years before I like confidently with my full chest could say that I was a game designer. And like the imposter syndrome is hard. um, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what actually led you to calling yourself a designer eventually? Was it just like the realization of like being fair to yourself because you are a designer, or?
I mean, a lot of it was like learning about internalized misogyny and unpacking some stuff and like learning that the whole thing of like what's a real gamer was really pointless and not like constructive. That I was, selling myself short, but also that other people didn't give themselves the same limitations that I was giving myself. I went on a string of dates with men who called themselves writers, but then when I would talk to them about it, they like hadn't written anything. And I was like, wow. Like, if you can tell me with your full chest that you're a writer, even though you have not written a single chapter of any of these ideas you have, and I've actually made games, like, I feel like I could call myself a game designer.
Yeah. I remember I was talking about doing art and that I didn't call myself an artist, but when you mentioned this stuff, I was like, oh, like, don't let other people's viewpoint on your labels, like, determine what you feel you are. And so now I've started to call myself an artist as well. So,
Yeah.
so thank you for that. Yeah. I like doing art. So therefore I am an artist, and it doesn't matter what other people think I am. Like, I embody that because it is what I am. So thank you for that.
Excellent.
So you've had experience working in different types of teams within AAA and the indie space. And I'm always curious to hear if you found any noticeable differences or similarities that you've encountered when comparing these two.
I mean, people are in games because they love making games. So in general, like, most people you come across are really cool. I've always felt like, wow, these are like my people. Like, no one blinks twice if you wear like a t-shirt that themes a video game, or if you play video games during your lunch. Like, the people, I think, are really consistently lovely across them. But like, I think the whole dynamics at play are really different. I consider myself lucky to have gotten my start in AAA because you are surrounded by people who've been doing this for like a decade and who've been doing it like a well-oiled machine. So you get to really see up close and personal, like, how the sausage is made. And you get to like learn from their mistakes and their histories and everything like that. And I had an incredible chance to like learn about all sorts of things, like, yes, like about how to like do game design stuff, but also how to do conferences, how to prepare a demo build. Like, we had dedicated people for playtesting, for data analytics, and like learning about those disciplines. So whereas in indie, like, your mileage will vary depending on who's in the team, a lot of paying for your own mistakes, a lot of not having those kinds of resources and those things. It really depends so much on the team. The other thing too is in AAA, like, especially when you're starting out, the success or failure of the project is not on your shoulders, right? Like, if a AAA game sinks because like their junior designer didn't carry their weight, like, there were bigger problems afoot. In indie, because of like the precarity of funding and everything, like, every game counts. And so I'm not going to say, oh, it's all on the junior shoulders, but I'm saying, like, you make more of an impact. And so I think there is more pressure there of like, well, if I want to continue working with these cool people, I really need to succeed. Whereas in AAA, it's like, this project could probably fail and there'll be another one after.
Yeah. I definitely have seen some of that. It's so interesting because it's sort of like, what is a better environment for a junior? Is it AAA or is it indie? And I'm kind of torn between the two.
I think the most important is to be somewhere where you're going to have actual mentorship, someone who has any sort of space to take care of you. I know at Ubisoft Montreal, which is where I spent, like, they have a lot of dedicated resources into training juniors. At least they did when I was there. I don't know how things might have changed, but like, they had like HR people who were developing programs. Like, I worked on the Discovery Tour, which was basically a game with the whole team being people who hadn't shipped before, except for like me and a couple other people, to give them like a safer training ground. Like, but they're big enough that they have the resources for that. Whereas in an indie studio, for instance, Spryfox, we tend to hire mostly seniors because we don't have the bandwidth for like training people up properly. So as a junior, if you have an opportunity to get to a spot that has someone who's actually going to be able to like actually mentor you and have that space, I think that's much more valuable.
That makes a lot of sense. I know when I was at Big Fish, which is not a AAA, but it was a mobile free-to-play studio and publisher, there was a lot of support there in helping people to grow. So it was really nice. So you're currently a lead designer, and I want to hear how you decided or knew that you wanted to become a lead. Was there a moment that defined this, or did you just kind of know from the start that this was your calling?
I think my personality is kind of like I want to help make things run well for people. And when I was still in AAA in those very large teams, I think I started to develop it near the end of being there, but it was just because I kept seeing these patterns of things happening. And I was like, oh man, I feel like I could design that better. And patterns of things happening in terms of like team dynamics, interdisciplinary communication, in terms of like, man, we really could have saved ourselves a lot of pain if we had just handled it this way instead of that way. And I really wanted a chance or a place where I could start putting some of that into action. I've always been someone who is like very collaborative. I like to bring in people's ideas. And so it's very natural for me when like coming up with something to like actively reach out to folks and bring them in and ask for their opinions. And that can be like super helpful in making sure like a team stays aligned even when they're going in different directions. And so lead to me is more like the thing I need to be able to actually try some things and be in a position to like have that larger overview and to facilitate the team that way. Like within Spryfox, like we're very flat in terms of it. Like we tend to rely people more as facilitators and we don't really have managers. So it's a bit different, but like in terms of my like responsibilities and everything, like I do think it's descriptive.
So when you have that feeling of, oh, I want to go and try these things, do things a bit better, when you first started leading, what was your approach? How did you even start? And is there anything that you would do differently now?
Yeah, it's a good point that like leading is a verb. To me, I see the lead as someone who is like responsible to other people in terms of seeing things through. You've ever tried to order pizza in a group and then like it's 45 minutes later and you don't have any pizza? It's because you're missing the lead. You're missing the lead to just be like, all right, does anyone have an objection to like a cheese pizza and a pepperoni? Like, let's go. But the lead should know that someone has a gluten allergy, right? And make sure that's accommodated for. That's the way I see it. So you're the person who's responsible to understanding your team and understanding your goals and like finding the best route towards them. And so that's why I kind of also think of it as another form of game design, because I think that's what design is.
I'm a really big fan of food comparisons. I use it for everything. I'm like, oh, it's like spaghetti. If you have spaghetti and ice cream together, they don't mix. It's like always food analogies. They're great. I think they're easy to understand. So that really tickled me. So you've been very involved in advocating for a healthy environment and development for people early in their careers. What inspired your passion for mentorship?
I mentioned a bit like when I was growing up, like I didn't think games counted and stuff like that. And I think I had a lot of internalized misogyny I had to work through. And I think it was getting to a place and being like, man, where are the other women? I was actually really lucky. My first project was For Honor, and we had a lot of women on the team. We had women game designers, programmers, especially as soon as I left that team, like there was very few. And just feeling like, well, it's not true that I'm like super exceptional. And so it makes sense that there's so few of us. It's like, okay, like the things that happened in my path that made me see that I love this and this was like a thing I could do, maybe haven't happened for other people because there's all these different like pressures and assumptions. And I wanted to get out there and like tell people the things I had learned and hopefully make things easier for them in return too. The first couple of years were kind of rough for me. When I say like the most important is to have someone who's like in a position to actually support you and mentor you, I didn't have that very much when I started out. So I want to help people shortcut that pain of learning on your own because it's a lot easier when you have someone who's like walked through it and can give you some advice.
Yeah, I feel very similarly. I was really lucky that I started in a studio as well that had a lot of women, and I've worked with a lot of women in my career, but I've definitely seen little sprinklings of like experiences that reminded me that we're treated different. And it always surprised me. I was always like, oh, it does happen. And, because I've been so fortunate. But like my first mentor was actually someone who took advantage of me. And so it was kind of a really sad experience for me. And I hadn't even realized it until way later. And then I was like, oh, well, it would be nice if I could go out and mentor other people so they don't have to have that experience. So I feel right there with you when it comes to how important it is and how helpful it is.
Like one of the things that took me way too long to realize is like, it's not normal for learning to hurt. Because I was like, oh, well, I'm learning, so it must be okay. Because I am learning something. And it's like, yeah, you can learn something without like grinding yourself down to like being a pit of a human being, or without like waking up in the middle of the night crying. Like that's not normal, actually. And I think every industry has this probably, but I only know the gaming industry, that can kind of drive you to stop believing yourself and stop believing like the signals your body is giving you, the signals your brain is giving you, and like talk yourself out of them. And there's other people who will also try to talk you out of them, but like it's not normal. Interaction I had like last summer that really like stuck with me was I hosted a little intro to game design workshop in a park. It was very cute. We did like cardboard games. We made those like fortune tellers. In French, we call them des coins coins. Those little like paper square things. Anyways, and someone had come and like we got to talking. We had a private discussion a bit later. And in the end, like I could tell she wanted to talk to me about something, but like I could also tell she was like nervous about it. And in the end, she finally asked me, and she's like, well, like, how do you know if it's a joke or not? And it like hurt my heart so much, because it was like, the fact that you're asking the question means it's not.
Yeah.
Right. And like she was in a position where she was relatively junior within the team, and someone in leadership was actively doing things to like be kind of degrading to her. And it was like super juvenile. And when she tried to like talk to other people around about it, it was like, oh, well, he's just like that. Like, it's just like that. And I just wanted her to understand, like, no, please believe yourself. If it's not sitting right, if it's to the point where you're going to come out to like an event and talk to me because you're like, I need a third perspective, believe yourself that it's not okay. And no one's desire to like be like that is more important than other people's right to be comfortable at work and to just feel respected. And I'm really sick of like having these like little princes that like prance around and like get to treat people like shit. And then everyone else has to be like, well, he's just a little prince. Like, truly, no. Like, yeah. Or like having a caged tiger in the back and you're like, oh no, don't go back there. Sometimes he sticks his paw through the cage and someone loses an arm, but he's just like that. Like, maybe we should find a different way. Those things have a tendency to become normalized in your workplace, and like you don't even see it anymore, right? Or you've talked yourself out of it. You've talked yourself out of believing yourself. And so when someone else is showing it, you're trying to help them by making them talk themselves out of it too, right? And like that's the thing that I think is really dangerous, because it prevents you from protecting yourself.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting when you mentioned like the warning signs that your body tells you, because in a lot of these instances, like in therapy, they tell you to like kind of look and like identify like how your body feels and like stop everything and examine that. And you can really tell when something's causing tension in you or stress. And if that's happening, it's not okay. No matter what, it's not okay, because like, even if you look at it like from a business standpoint or like a professional standpoint, it's affecting you and causing you to not work to the best of your ability. So at the very least, that should be a sign that like, it's not okay. Yeah.
It's also hard out there, right? And so I can understand doing the math and being like, okay, this person's kind of a dick and makes me feel bad when I interact with them. But as long as you believe yourself that that person is a dick and it's not your flaw, then you have options, right? You can be like, do I have people around me who can intervene that this person's being a dick? Does this dick have power over my career? Do I need to be nice to them? Like, you can do that math, right? And decide, but at least you're not letting it become a reflection of your worth. But when you're starting out, you don't have that foundation. It's super dangerous because those people like will push you to believe like things that aren't true about yourself.
Yeah. I've had coworkers that have leaders who tell them they're just like bad designers and like really off of no evidence, no true evidence. It was just like, just a comment and would constantly tell them that and it made them feel it. And in my eyes, they were great. And so it's sort of like how these leaders can really affect how people like believe in themselves and how they don't believe in themselves. And it's just like, I'm really happy that people like you are mentoring people earlier in their career so they know that they don't have to feel that way and find ways to identify like what's real, what's really happening there.
It's hard. And also like mentorship's like a one-on-one thing. Like it's hard to find someone that you vibe with to like mentor. And like these spaces are different depending on who you are. So much of it is someone going to look at you and be like, oh, you remind me of me when I started. And so I'm going to let you in on like this like information that no one tells you up front. Because I think the main advice I received, and I think that is given freely, is like, oh, you just have to really work hard. Like work hard. You'll get ahead, or work hard and you'll be recognized. And it's like, it's not true, but it's not it, you know? If you're getting into games and you're all that, like you probably don't have a problem with working hard. Like I very seldomly seen people starting out who didn't already work themselves ragged. Like when I was teaching, I would like actively tell my students to fucking chill out over the summer because they were telling me about like their 6 side projects they want to do. I'm like, this might be your last summer before you go into a career and then you never have summers off. Like, please take a time to enjoy your life. So you need the people who are going to tell you what to work hard on. You need the people who are going to see that you work hard or that you work well. You're going to have to learn the difference between working hard and working well, which are different things because it's very, very easy to waste your energy on stuff. And so I think part of like growing in professionalism is learning what's worth working hard on. If you half-ass and wait till later, like what's the right amount of work for this moment? Because there's no one in leadership that doesn't like someone who's working hard all the time, unless they're very active in trying to like support healthy work boundaries, which is unfortunately very rare. Like if you're like, oh, well, I'll just work hard all the time, no one's going to stop you. There's no guardrails. And so that's why for me, it's about like sending the message that like, no, you have to stop yourself because they will take everything from you that you will give them.
Yeah. It's also like, how do you even define work hard? Because there's like working long, there's like, and there's so many facets to like working well, right? Like if you need the time to research and grow, that's going to benefit like your work. But if you define working hard as like just constantly like implementing, you're never going to get that growth. Well, you will through iteration, but it's like a different type of growth. Yeah,
absolutely. And it depends on like what your position is, right? And that's why mentoring is useful because you can get to know the person's situation. It's really hard to give broad advice because there's such a wide variety of game design roles and different things and team dynamics. Like it'll change, but like it really depends. Like, are you working on something that's gonna matter, like to people or that will be recognized? And if you're working on something that's like important for the game to like exist, but not something that's like super meaningful to folks, do you have people who are still going to appreciate you doing that? Like it's really easy to become in a cycle where if you do tedious work well, then congratulations, you're going to get more tedious work. And if you think that you're somehow going to do a lot of excellent tedious work and that's going to get you fun work, like you better make sure that there's an actual plan for you to get off the tedious work treadmill. Because otherwise you might just become the captain supreme of tedious work. I say tedious work, it's also super personal, right? What's tedious work to me might not be tedious work to you. And so that's the best thing about a team is hopefully that you have overlapping interests and like things that you love to do, things that you hate to do. And then if there's stuff that people hate to do, you can take turns like carrying the load. But like, that's why it's really important to know yourself.
Yeah, it's hard to get to know yourself though. It's fun because like game development in general, like we often hear like it's all about communication. It's all about like, and there's like a lot of like adapting to situations and synergies and prioritization. It's like just a combination of things. And it really depends on the situation that you're in or who you're working with. And it's definitely hard to have like kind of a catch-all advice for everyone, as you've said.
I think the biggest catch-all is like understanding yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like, because that's the foundation upon everything else that will build. And especially when you're starting out, like a lot of designers are like, I don't know what I want to specialize in. And that's great, honestly. Like put as many arrows in your quiver as your little heart desires. But like part of you growing as a designer is going to be learning like which things resonate more with you, which things are more nourishing, which things are more taxing, and which things are more demanding. And it doesn't mean you'll never do the taxing stuff. On my project right now, like they were like, what do you want to work on? It's like, please don't make me in charge of economy. And now I'm going to be doing the first couple of drafts on economy. But that's okay because I trust my team and I don't hate it too much, but I just never feel super confident in my decisions. But like, you know, each designer has like their different flavor of like what's going to resonate with them and how they bring it. Each designer would solve a problem a different way. And so I think part of growing as a designer is learning what's your flavor. What are the things that you naturally go to? What are the things that are not your strength so that you can like be upfront and accommodate them, right? Because if you ask me to do something that's not my strength, I'm going to ask for a buddy who does have a strength in that, or I'm going to say like, okay, I'll do it, but no, that you're going to get what I could give you.
Have you had experience with mentoring junior designers compared to like mentoring peers? Is there a difference or have you found a difference?
Yeah. In terms of mentorship, like in terms of working with a junior and helping them grow, I did that over the last like year and a half at my current position. But I've also been involved in a lot of like intro to game design stuff. I did some teaching. I have some like occasional calls with some folks to just like check in or give them advice or see where they're at. And I think my approach in general is the same, but like I try to give grace that perhaps the junior people will need more context or need different kinds of advice. But even then, you know, just because you're new to the games industry doesn't mean you're new to life. So I always try to like ask a lot of questions and get to know the person and like try not to make assumptions on what they do or don't know. And if they understand something, like ask them what their understanding is. So maybe I can offer a different angle or like contrast it. Also because it's not like I have all the answers. My longest running mentee, Tiffany, who is brilliant, by the way, one day she will take over this whole world. Like she was talking to me about working on a feature and she was just having a hard time because it was kind of boring to her. Like she was struggling with it. And I gave her my approaches to it of like, you know, well, maybe there's like an aspect of it that resonates more with you. Maybe you can put on some music while you do it, like whatever it is. And then like 2 weeks later, she talks to me. She's like, Alicia, none of your things worked, but I found something different that worked. And I was like, great. You know what? That's what I really want. I just want to like give you some prompts. And if you figure out something completely different that like makes it work for you, that's so much better. Like I don't have a scorecard. I'm not like, oh, you listened to me or you didn't listen to me. I'm just here to like give you one perspective because I think too, like people need different things and ultimately you have to be the one to analyze your situation and see if it resonates or not. I'm not a good mentor for all kinds of people. Like I think you need a mentor who like understands who you are a little bit. If you're someone who's ever like struggled with like imposter syndrome or working too hard, then I'm pretty good. But I had some students who were just like confident and I was like, I don't know. It took me a while to like, I'm like, oh, okay. And then I had to like change my approach when I was like trying to push them harder. So I think that's another thing too. If you're looking for mentors and stuff like that and you're like, well, I don't know if I agree with what they say, that's normal, right? We're all just people. We're all just trying to like give you our perspective and people can be wrong. It's been 10 years since I've been starting out in the industry. So I'm sure things are different than when I was there. So I try not to give too much like specific, like you should do this or you should do that. I just try to give like lenses to like analyze or try to understand and maybe some approaches that like I've seen work for other people or who have worked for me.
Yeah. I like thinking of it as prompts because the people who have mentored me, like I found like they ask me a lot of questions and that brings me to my own answers, which have been really nice. So I think that aligns with what you're saying there.
And actually, some of the mentors I had would actually just give me concrete like design references, and that was also super helpful. I remember like the ARMS like model of like autonomy, relatedness, and mastery of like player motivations wasn't something I had seen because I had been studying like fine arts and art and technology. So I was kind of missing that facet, and like that was concretely super helpful. So there's also that part of it, but like I find that is kind of like limited. Like there's only so much actual textbook stuff you need. Games generally don't run like a textbook. So it should feed you and give you like references and ways to analyze things, but they're not the end.
Yeah. When talking to my coworkers about the situations and experiences they've had, it's been really like a big learning experience for me where I would hear what my coworkers have gone through in certain situations and how they handled it. And just hearing that, even if it didn't work out for them, like was really big learning. So it's sort of been eye-opening to me when it comes to peer-to-peer mentorship. Like even hearing about your experiences, I'm like, oh, right. That's a good thing to consider. And so
yeah. And like, it's sometimes hard to find a mentor who's ahead who has like brain bandwidth to talk to you. So like you can take what you can get, right? Like that's all good. But I think your peers are also navigating things and have the same perspective as you. And so even when you're starting out, a good friend of mine, Osama, always likes to tell like juniors that they should have a mentor who's ahead of you and a mentor who's on the same level because you're having the same perspective on things. And like being able to like be open and honest with someone else of like what you're seeing or what you're feeling or what's going on or what their perspective and have that exchange is like super important because you're building out together what this next generation of the industry is going to look like.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any memorable mentorship experiences that have had an impact on you, either as a mentee or a mentor?
I think I kind of mentioned it obliquely that like there's a few moments that helped me find games eventually because like I didn't really think that the games were legit for me or anything, but I always had an interest in technology. It was like little things. Like I did a Flash class in college to Flash animation, and I learned that you could put stop in a cell and tell it what to do. And I was like, oh, what else can I tell it what to do? And at the time, I was a fine arts student. So I was doing painting and sculpting and stuff like that. And the professor of that Flash class saw me like getting excited, and he so encouraged me and like said like that is like special what you made, and like was just like really reinforcing that interest. And it empowered me to like make projects that were based in Flash or like learn how to code my own little stuff. And like, man, I was scared of for loops, so I would just like copy paste stuff. But I was able to brute force my way into making projects. And like during university, when I was studying art and technology, I just was going through like a moment where I was really depressed. And I felt like, man, this isn't for me. I don't know what I thought I was doing here. Like I almost dropped out, honestly. And it was Jerry Brzezowska, who's still the chair of the department, who I went to talk to her, and she was like, why don't you take one class? Take this one class. And she gave me with a specific professor, and she was like, just do that before you drop out. And it reignited my love for what I was doing. And I ended up doing super well when I graduated because they could see something in the way I worked that I couldn't see. I think as you gain seniority, you can see it too in other people. And when you tell someone that, like, you're helping them discover that themselves. So yeah, I hope I can also be helpful to folks.
I mean, you already have. I'm calling myself an artist. That's like really an achievement because I probably never would have. So yeah, it's working. You're doing great. So I can tell you're quite passionate when it comes to helping people grow and thrive in a healthy environment. And I know you've kind of gone into like outside of this episode, you've gone into like ways that you can, look out for your well-being when it comes to being in this industry. But I wanted to ask if there's any advice you'd like to give here when it comes to like how to tell if you're in the right environment for thriving and knowing that people are going to support you.
Yeah. I think every place is different and it takes a lot of different elements to grow. And it's okay if sometimes you're growing more in one area and less in another, but it's more about becoming aware of what's going on versus just thinking that if I just keep doing what's immediately in front of me, I'm going to end up exactly where I want to be. And I think it's normal to not know exactly where you want to be, right? I think that's normal that takes time and that can change and all of that. But I think it's worth taking a step back regularly to be is this what I want to be doing? Is this where I want to go to? So I always talk about is the goal is to have a sustainable career. I think it's really important not to tie goals too much to any individual project. Our industry can be super rocky and projects get canceled and everything else. I won't lie, it feels great when you ship something and you can write that you shipped something. But I think sometimes people get afraid of well, if I haven't shipped anything, then no one's going to hire me. It's no, everyone knows that it's not necessarily your fault that the thing didn't ship. So I always think the goal is a sustainable career. So that requires learning your craft and working to hone your craft. It also requires learning when to work less hard and when how to be efficient with your craft, right? Because as a designer, I'm the fucking worst. I get a project, it's oh, make this simple thing. And I'm oh, but what if this and what if this and what if this? And I love that energy. I think it's a good energy, and I blurt it all down on the side to get it out of my system so then I can focus on the thing. Because if I actually go down the path of making those things happen, I've put a lot of energy into a system that doesn't exist yet, that hasn't been built yet, that we don't even know if we're going to keep yet. And that could be a lot of wasted energy. So it's about learning how to work with yourself. Also, people tell you a specific way to do something, but maybe that's not the way that your brain wants to do it, or that makes more sense for you. And it's not because that's the way other people do it, that is the way that you need to be able to do it. So giving yourself permission to try different ways that you think will fit better with you. But especially, it's a lot about your community, right? Who are the people around you who see you, who see your efforts, who can give you real feedback, but also in French, the word is bienveillant, in a caring way, right? Because I would say feedback in general is valuable. But if you're getting feedback that hurts to receive, that's not the only way feedback can be given. It doesn't have to hurt, right? And so you can decide that okay, this feedback hurts to receive. I'm going to take a little bit because I think this person has insight in the thing I want to learn on. But I have to know that the fact that it hurts is not because it needs to hurt, is because that person doesn't know how to give me that feedback in a way that doesn't hurt. I was always kind of trying to justify and if someone gave me feedback, I'd be oh, but it's for all these reasons. That's not what I mean by feedback hurting. That was just me having to learn how to be quiet and not feel and just listen to the feedback and just not justify it. But when I talk about feedback hurting, I mean feedback that makes you feel small. Feedback that wears on your self-esteem, that makes you feel incapable, that makes you feel less than. That's not okay. And if someone's giving you feedback in a way that, I don't know, they're brutally honest or some bullshit, it's because of their inability to give you feedback in a more constructive way. It is not constructive to rip someone down, to give them feedback.
Quite a few people are I'm just honest. And I'm you can be honest, but not hurtful. You can be honest and just constructive. There are ways of wording your feedback that is more helpful to the person. It's not just about honesty. It's about how that person will take it. Otherwise, it's not useful. What's the point of giving hurtful feedback if it's not going to benefit the person you're giving to?
Yeah, sometimes people want to give feedback just to prove that they're right or that they have something to say about something. And so that's why the community is important, because you can find people who can give you really insightful and constructive feedback. And maybe it's not always easy to take because you're oh man, I really thought it was like this. That's fine. That's growth. You can get through that. But you don't want to have your main source of feedback be someone who makes you feel small. And within that community, there's mentors and advocates. So people who are ahead of you can give you some insight, but also people who are within your team who can advocate for you. And especially when you're starting out, every company hierarchy is extremely different. But the whole thing of going from a level 1 to a level 2 or junior to associate or whatever that looks like, even if your company has a rubric, the rubric's not worth shit if there's not a manager who's willing to go into whatever meeting they have when they discuss like promotions and whatever and advocate for you and say, no, this person's put in the work and they're ready. That is like so essential. And so if you have a great team, but you don't have any advocates, you're going to stall. And maybe that's fine. Maybe you're like somewhere where you love the work, getting a really good experience, and it's okay. But you just need to know that that's going to be a place that's going to be really hard for you to move up in if that's something that you want, or like change teams or whatever you want. Like you need advocates.
Are there ways that you've worked to kind of create this sort of environment where there are advocates for your team, or have there been roadblocks when it comes to building these or advocating for these?
I mean, it's part of the reason I'm not in AAA is just because like I found those hierarchies are very thick and difficult to navigate. They require a kind of like social navigation that I'm just not attuned with, that like just doesn't fit with me at all. And I got really lucky. Like Spry Fox is very open and that culture fits with me a lot better. But that's part of it, right? Like I had actually a couple of advocates within AAA who were like starting to give me like the real advice that I would need to move up. And then I was like, I don't like this advice and I don't want to be that way. And it's not that that way was necessarily really evil or bad or anything. It was just like, I'm going to be so exhausted if I have to do that all the time. And I left AAA. I was like, let's go see what other things I like. And it's about like growing your network of people who see development the way you do and that you're compatible with. And it doesn't mean you agree on everything, but you have to be overall compatible. And so I have a network of peers that I know that I'm compatible with, that I share values with. And I was very lucky to find a studio that I'm compatible with and I share values with. But I have mostly developed the ability to understand what my values are. And so then I can recognize them in others and decide where I'm going to push myself towards, where I'm going to invest my time and my energy. So that's why I always think like the number one thing is like to ground yourself in yourself. It's the only thing you can control. You can't control the industry. The industry is super unpredictable. I love where I am right now. Like who knows what'll happen in a year, in 2 years. Like this industry is like ready to implode. And so there might be a time, again, where I find myself in a team that maybe isn't the best fit for me. But like now I'm grounded enough in myself that I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do to like make it through this thing so I can find the next thing that fits well with me? And also the industry is like incredibly tiny, teeny tiny. So like when you do find people that you resonate with, like you will cross paths again. That is actually really excellent. I think students, especially for juniors, but like I know you're not necessarily students, but whatever that cohort is of people who are at this beginning stage with you, like in 5 years, they're going to be the same cohort of people who have 5 years experience with you. And that's really special. So also nurturing those peer relationships is super important so that like you have that like network that grows with you as you advance.
This is probably related to what you're talking about right now, but I have a final wrap-up question for you. Well, it's probably more like 2 questions, but where do you find your motivation when things are tough? And what are the values that are important to you as a leader?
To talk about when things are tough first, like I've gone through burnout in 2023. I was part of a GDC talk on burnout with a few other people. And like I talk a bit more specifically about my experience there. But like there's a while where I became really separated from why do I even do this? Like I was just like, none of my ideas are good. I hate everything I'm working on. Like I had to take a step back. I was putting a lot of energy into things that weren't paying off. And I did a game jam. I found the like space to do a game jam. And I remember coming out of that game jam and I had my little prototype and I was like, yeah, I could fucking do this. I got help. I was seeing a therapist and it helped me like assess my surroundings and like make decisions. And then I just started initially, like I didn't know if I would find something that I was a good fit with, but I just started, making my portfolio again. I started like redoing my CV, just feeling like I had an option to leave, just to not feel like I was in like a little cage that I couldn't escape. And the thing is, like when you prepare that stuff, then when there is an opportunity, you're ready for it. In terms of what like gives me inspiration, now I know myself well enough to know when I'm getting crispy, like when I'm getting towards working too hard, and I take a step back. And thankfully, I'm in a team who understands that and are really supportive. And then I just like to look at trees. I go on plant walks. In my spare time, I try to nurture a lot of hobbies that are non-digital. I do a lot of crafting and like getting back into my art practice. Actually, I find it is very nourishing. And then it gives me the space so that when I do go and do like my actual game job, I'm like not exhausted from it, right? I'm like, oh, this is another cool thing I get to do. I strongly believe that your team is more important than the product. Games that come and go, but your team, like they're the people who make it. They're the creatives. Like games are art. It's a miracle that any of them ever ship. And if you don't take care of your people, then things are going to crumble. And that's really there. And the idea that in order to ship good things, you have to destroy your team, I think is not true. I also believe that like as a leader, you're really accountable and responsible to like how things are running in the team. And that's something I had to learn some nuance with because I felt that way. But then I was feeling personally responsible for everyone's bad day. And that's not what I mean. I just mean like, oh, if something's spitting out and like not getting traction, if there's a big confusion in an area, like I think as a leader, it's too easy to be like, well, that team didn't know what they were doing. No, like what could I have done better to help that go better? Right? Like, oh, was that in one of my blind spots? Oh, is that something that someone's struggling with? Can I give them support on that? Like, I think it's too easy to just like blame other people for things going wrong. And as a leader, because you have impact, you also have a responsibility to be constantly looking at like, am I doing something that is making this worse? And so if someone tells you, oh, there's a problem over here, and they give you a list of reasons and they're not a part of it, like to me, that's a big red flag. Because you're always a part of it.
Because you're a team. And
you're a team.
Yeah.
And as a leader, you're like setting the course. And so did you set a course that your team can follow you on? Like, figure that out.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So in summary, you as a leader are part of the team and accountability is key. And spend more time with trees.
Always spend time with trees.
I like ending on that note. So this has been so wonderful, and I really enjoyed chatting with you. I also appreciate all the times you've personally looked out for my well-being. So I wanted to thank you for that, and I'm so glad that people like you are leading. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Kim. This is really lovely.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. We keep growing our community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders, because we have so much more we can learn from each other. And if you want to accelerate your growth, I offer creative leadership coaching and workshop, plus other free resources that you can find on riseandplay.io. I can't wait to connect with you. Have a great week, and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time.